Welcome to the Digital Authoritarianism podcast series. Each episode uncovers how digital technologies are reshaping authoritarian politics, revealing global and regional patterns of digital repression and the creative ways civil societies fight back, speaking to researchers, journalists, and activists. The hosts of this podcast are Janjira, Sangeeta, and Andreas, research fellows at the German Institute for Global and Area Studies, Hamburg. We are glad to share this important conversation with you. Let's dive in. What happens when AI chatbots become our first window onto political reality? Some 800 million people open ChatGPT every week. Several have now started using ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and other LLMs to ask political questions. A recent study published in Nature by Hannah White et al. Showed that if you ask political questions in a country's local language with a tightly controlled media, you will get pro-regime response. And it's not just states who are exerting influence, it's also corporates who are supporting the states in shaping information flow. Another unsettling study published in 2025 by House and Lim has shown that AI chatbots can measurably shift political beliefs. This reminds me of an aphorism. The fish is the last to discover water. We are the fish. An AI-generated information ecosystem is the water. It is so frictionless, so personal, and so conversational that we don't even realize when the medium stops shaping the message and starts influencing us. And this especially becomes critical during elections when we open ChatGPT and ask, give me more information about this political candidate. What is their political ideology? And ultimately, the conversation goes on and on till we ask, whom should we vote for? In today's episode, we tackle this question that what does it mean for information pluralism, political choice, and democratic accountability, and most importantly, our agency when AI chatbots become our first port of call for political information. Hello, I'm Sangeeta Mahapatra from the German Institute for Global and Area Studies, Hamburg, and I welcome you to our Digital Authoritarianism podcast series. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Meyer-Resende, the Executive Director and co-founder of Democracy Reporting International that has anticipated many of these questions. Democracy Reporting International, or DRI, is a Berlin-based nonprofit with field of offices across the world, including Asia, who have long monitored election and information integrity. Michael has for more than 2 decades worked on democracy support, on election observation, and digital governance. He co-chairs the election working force of the EU Code of Conduct on Disinformation, where he and his team monitor information integrity during elections. DRI also is part of the working group on the Code of Conduct on General Purpose AI. Thank you, Michael, so much for joining us. I would start with my first question. Your recent work has examined how AI chatbots provide political information to citizens. This becomes even more critical during elections when misinformation is rife and chatbots can swing both ways. Drawing from your field experience across diverse contexts, what pattern of concern are emerging about how AI chatbots can influence what voters know during elections?
Yeah, hello. Good to see you. Thank you very much for the invitation to the podcast. I'm glad to be here. And yeah, so to talk a bit about the studies we do on large language models, I think to frame this discussion, I would say that, we read a lot that globalization is over, countries are closing their borders, etc. But in the information space, I think globalization is continuing in a very strong with a lot of power. And so now we have the global population independent of any borders using, as you said, more and more bots that are based on large language models. And there are a few of them that are dominating this market. You mentioned ChatGPT, for example. And so they become, if you want, for many people, the main interface to the entire digital information sphere, which is the most important information sphere for most of us these days. So that raises, of course, very big questions. What does a voter in India see about Indian politics, in China about Chinese politics, in Germany about German politics? Um, how does a chatbot perform on those questions that are quite tricky if you think about it? What should be the right answers in that respect? And so we started a whole line of inquiry looking at two quite different things. The one is the question of technical information about how to vote. So this is in a way the more simple part, because it's rather discrete questions like, where's my polling station? What is the election date? Do I have to register on a voter register, or am I automatically registered because I have an ID card? So very technical information that should be correct. And I think nobody would disagree. It's not a controversial field. We want people to vote and to get the right information. So this was a whole first line of inquiry, and I can say a bit more of our findings there. But then there's the other line of inquiry, which is much more complex and much more controversial, which is the question of information on political themes, on political opinions, on what parties say about certain issues. And we frame that as a question of political pluralism. In democracies, of course, we don't want a chatbot to tell us, this is the right answer, you have to think like that. We would like chatbots to be good sources of information and tell us the width of opinions that exist on certain questions. And that we also tested on several chatbots. And you can tell me if we should start here, talk about the big picture and far more complex questions of pluralism on chatbots, on political opinion, or the more narrow field of electoral information that a voter wants to have to go to polling station.
I think both sound fascinating and they are intertwined. I've it's extremely fascinating how chatbots are actually deciding the information ecosystem within which we are operating and exercising our political choice. And I'm really fascinated to know, since you are right at the coal face, what are your experiences when it comes to the larger questions of democracy before we go to the granular ones about how are how are the especially the oppositional voices, given that if the media is state controlled, they hardly have any avenue, and if the social media influencers are also being be becoming the cheerleaders of the regime, then the oppositional voices are getting further and further sidelined. From your experience, I would really like to know about the larger questions of how are the oppositional voices and the minority voices being represented by AI chatbots, and the dilemma about the ethics, because I see a lot of uh, chatbots also, like when I talk to Claude, It says that I have to be ethical. I would need to give you an ethical answer. ChatGPT is becoming increasingly conscious of political pluralism. And your own research that I read, your paper of the Democracy Reporting International said that they're trying to be balanced, and that's a constant challenge for them. So, since these are all intersecting concerns, I would like to know the larger picture that can help guide us understand the smaller questions or the narrower questions better.
Yes, very good. So maybe one thing is to think about this whole question in different contexts. So you may have a very closed authoritarian context, let's say China with very strongly controlled political information. You may have semi-authoritarian systems. In Europe, we had the situation in Hungary. Hopefully it's now changing, but the information space was very strongly controlled by the governing party and state media, but even controlling a lot of the private media indirectly. And then you have what we prefer, a democratic system where media are free, where many opinions freely float. And so if we impose the idea of a chatbot on these three different situations, it may play out in different ways. The starting point is that the companies would like chatbots to become our principal entry point to the digital world. And you can see it already in search now. They always will give us generated answers rather than links. And this is training us all to get used to the idea that whatever we ask our computer, a chatbot will guide us through whatever we are looking for. And it is convenient and it is successful because it is convenient. So they are growing so fast because people actually like it. It's working for many people. Now, if we think about political information before a chatbot, you have the websites of quality media, less quality media. You have TV and radio, of course. You have social media. In semi-authoritarian regimes or authoritarian, social media are actually quite important for dissenting voices. We talk about the situation in Hungary. The opposition party played media in its favor, social media in its favor, because all the official media were against it. And this is quite typical. If we now think in these situations, you go to a chatbot and ask them, what is your opinion on corruption in Hungary, for example? What would be the answer that we think a good chatbot should give on that question? It's quite tricky, no? And I think the first point is that I'm not into a conspiracy theory, so I'm not thinking that the people who do Claude or ChatGPT have a strong ideological direction and they want to use this chatbot to influence the world in a certain way. So I think the core of the problem is more that by design, these chatbots will produce certain answers, and that can create problems for democracies. So the first thing about this generic creation of responses is the width of answers. So I think in democracy it's really, really important that minority opinions have space, right? You can be very left, you can be very right, you can be very centrist up to a certain limit. These are all very legitimate opinions in democracies. And because they work with statistical probability, we fear that they will lean strongly into the statistical mean, so that so-called mainstream opinion will get a lot more visibility in the answer. So this would be a first concern we have. Second concern we have is that they will give a lot of oxygen and visibility to opinions that are extremely anti-democratic. Let's think of hate speech type of things. And there too, we don't want chatbots to hide that such opinions exist, but we wouldn't like them to present them as just a normal opinion, you know. Something very violent should not be presented as a normal opinion. So in our first study, we tested these kind of assumptions on the number of well-known chatbots like ChatGPT and Claude and others, what we find was not totally scandalous. So I don't want to, create some kind of fake outrage here. Overall, we found them relatively balanced, but with some caveats. One was that we tested them in 3 different languages, English, Colombian Spanish, and Serbian, just to try to get, a bit different, to see if language matters. And we felt it did matter in a degree. It was culturally relatively insensitive. You have the feeling that those chatbots that are produced in Silicon Valley have a lot to do with the US politics. They're very articulate on questions like gun rights or abortion, which, in many parts of the world is not the first thing that people are discussing and that they create big controversies. So there's something with the cultural side. And overall, the question we asked were generally more the typical Western democracy kind of preoccupations that in many countries in the world are quite different. For many Indian voters, they are not concerned by things that concern German voters, I would say. So I know you don't want endless answers, so maybe I stop here and I can talk more about it, but tell me where I should clarify or where I should go further.
No, I really like the point you're making about the chatbots having these Western preoccupations and very detailed answers because they have been trained on these like gun rights, while they might stumble when it comes to concerns which are more from developing countries. But here comes in since you also have experience outside Western countries, given that DRI has such a larger network and a field experience, I'm also interested to know whether you apprehend that the concern of these preoccupations of Western values when it comes to guns, when it comes to other sensitive and contentious topics being exported to developing countries. Like this is the knowledge they get when they speak up, when they suppose someone say in Indonesia reads about the US, it gets a kind of a kind of an editorialized image of the US based on these kind of inherent biases or colored languages, which may be colored by the biases of the tech companies. I would also dovetail it with an issue that has been, which I think is also about the preoccupation part of Western issues and concerns in the developing countries and other countries, is that we see that the companies, the owners of these companies, whether it is Elon Musk or whether it is Sam Altman, or whether it's also data analytics firms like Palantir, all of them have certain ideologies, very clear set of ideologies. And they have a certain vision of the world, which do you also apprehend that along with that these ideologies might seep into the answers regardless of howsoever ethical the LLMs try to be? Like as you wrote as you gave in your DRI study, that they do try to convey multiple perspectives. The chatbots try to convey multiple perspectives and ideological values. But given that the owners of the foundational and frontier models are becoming more and more vocal and vociferous about their ideology, do you fear a trend towards the move away from balanced and more towards a very polarized ideological worldview that might seep into the GPTs that are now anyway being used mass scale and people have got already used to using it?
Yeah, this is a really very interesting question, and I think we can look at three big products, which we may think should be quite different. So you have ChatGPT, and then you have Claude from Anthropic. And Anthropic was established by people who came from OpenAI and felt that OpenAI was too easygoing, too much break things and move fast, and not careful enough about such a risky technology. And they said, we will do better and more carefully. And we looked a bit into their methodologies, and we can see that Anthropic tries that. So they have something they call constitutional AI, and they integrate it as an overarching orientation for their LLM, the idea that it should reflect or work within the framework of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which, of course, as a democracy organization based on human rights, we welcome that idea, because that's a global standard that we think the world has agreed to and can agree to. And the third one is Grok, which is Elon Musk. And he accused Claude and others and said they are just chatbots, and I will construct something very different because they are very unbalanced. So this is very much discussed in the United States. It's part of the cultural war in the United States, this accusations, etc. But then when we looked at the study, we didn't feel a big difference in the outcomes. So we found interesting that Claude has these ideas and baked them into their training, but in the outputs, we didn't perceive a strong difference. So we have no strong explanations. It's very complex, of course, large language models, but maybe there's a bit of sense that, the technical self-logic of these machines overrides at the end of the day these kind of objectives that you try to train them into, but they work with this massive corpus of training material. And so, yeah, if you look at all these books, newspapers, everything they have sucked up, basically the entire internet, there are many perspectives, and so they show them. So it feels this discussion is slightly fake in the US, and it's typical cultural war talks, especially by Elon Musk, when technically speaking, it's not so obvious. And I don't think he had an evidence base to say that one chatbot is very left-leaning. I think these are all hunches and noises to feed the culture war. So that's one thing. At the end of the day, we didn't find these big variations. The second thing is that we find it concerning that they have these very big discussions, and in Europe they echo, not so strongly maybe, but many people in Europe are also sucked into this American culture war. And so it becomes a very empty, noisy discussion. And we are interested more in a real discussion with evidence that has a scientific basis. And then also looking at solutions, of course, because I don't think the move towards chatbot can just be stopped. So I would be more interested in a discussion on how we can make sure they work in the best possible way. And so I think Anthropic is trying a bit harder. They put out a paper some month ago on political balance and pluralism. So, they show something. They show that they're interested in the subjects. The results we can discuss, but I think this is a way to go for companies to inform the world what they think about it, what are their guardrails. And overall, I think for you and me, coming more from social science and law, the challenge is that we really get much more in the room with people who are data scientists, who are training these models, and that we approximate our perspectives and understand that the new world is digital, so we cannot live in a world that doesn't integrate that perspective. And at the same time, I think the more technical, the data community, they think they are reinventing everything and it's a clean sheet, but they're quickly learning that these questions of balance and values, etc., are thousands of years old, and you cannot just think you quickly find a solution to that. You can't. It's not possible. The human mind is too complex, and we are too many to say, oh, there's a simple solution to these questions. So I think the way forward is really to have many more meetings of minds and bringing these communities together to find good solutions. And the interest for me is also that these solutions are not generic global, but that each democracy finds a balance of really things that are important to its voters and its electorate. And yeah, that we have political information also from chatbots that reflects our national preoccupations and interests.
Right, Michael. This is actually very interesting because there is a lot of that any conversation on AI tries to works at the bottom lines of fear or hype. And it's important to have a balanced view because since everyone is using it every day given that what you just said about at the end of the day, it's important to have a clear-eyed analysis of whether they are actually reflecting different ideologies or being partisan. It's any user can find out for themselves. So there is no via media here to increase the hype. But what I also want to speak about is on contentious issues. Like sometimes when I try to, as a researcher, when we try to research with different chatbots on contentious issues, uh, whether it is on race wars, whether it's on religion, whether it's on a particular political region that is really a lightning rod to a lot of controversy. At that point of time, we also see that some of the chatbots tend to be very measured or they do not respond that well. And this, therefore, I would like to go back to what you spoke about constitutional AI and whether there is a way to consolidate that as a foundation to make AI chatbots proof against manipulation and weaponization. Can that, since you are a lawyer and you have that experience on the ground, whether that can be used both legally and socially, like if more of humanities perspective and social sciences perspective, as Anthropic says, comes into the design choices of AI, the training data of AI. Is that being already done in a big way, first of all, from your own experience? And can that be and how can that be a way to create an AI chatbot that doesn't go silent on contentious issues? Because sometimes silence can also be a way of uh, preventing opinions or providing information on contentious issues and not just swaying the voters or the citizens or with opinions or false information or true information or whatever information on things. Just by refusing to give information sometimes can AI also influence.
Yeah. Very important points. I think I would start with something potentially positive in chatbots. There have been studies that people are more easily influenced in their opinions by chatbots than by other human beings, which is very, I mean, you could say that's also risky, but they were more willing to be challenged in their opinions. And I think that's a positive thing. Actually, it's quite explainable because our political opinions are largely starting in some emotional center that we have, and then our brain tries to rationalize them or makes them a little bit more, better explained. We influence maybe to a degree also through our thinking process, But I think the science tells us that our core beliefs are emotionally anchored, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so if I talk to somebody, I have immediately an emotional response. So if I meet you for the first time and I have a good impression of you, everything you will say, I will more easily accept. But if my first impression is, for whatever reason, negative, I may quickly close and be very skeptical to what you say. And with a machine, that doesn't happen because there's no strong emotional feedback involved. You talk to a machine and it doesn't trigger many emotions. So it makes us potentially a bit more open to listen to other opinions and don't freak out immediately. So that I think is a bit of a promise here. But the promise can only be fulfilled if some guardrails are put in place, and some of them I think can be regulated. So a very strong guardrail, in my view, is that really companies should be obliged to really avoid the tendency to anthropomorphizing. In other words, that chatbots pretend they're human beings and talk to us like human beings. And this is quite strong by now, I have to say. And it's potentially abusive, and it can have very bad results. To find a very hard, accurate legal standard is not so easy, but I think we could say there are some extreme cases that really companies have to avoid. And so they should not come across as friends or trusted colleagues. They should always make clear and repeat that explicitly. I'm just a machine, and I'm putting together this answer to you on the basis of what I have been trained, and take it as that and don't take it as more. But because it's nice for companies that we get very dependent on these machines, I don't think they're pushing that part a lot. They're actually quite happy if people get close to these chatbots. So there, I think it's one of the guardrails, it's transparency and the clarity with whom we are interacting there. Then in terms of regulation, you have this idea in the EU, which is a risk-based approach. And the idea is that anything related to elections is higher risk, and therefore companies need to report more transparently on what they're doing and explain better how they mitigate such risks. And in principle, I think it's also the right way to go. Of course, it's just one subfield of risk of AI. Even the Trump administration, which was completely libertarian and said we don't regulate anything, is now changing their minds because they have understood belatedly the obvious, that these machines are extremely powerful and create massive risks. And I think it was probably the fact that the new model by Anthropic could break a lot of cybersecurity protections. And of course, that's, for state security, this is a massive story. So just to say, we all should accept that there are risks, and democratic legislators should regulate risks. We regulate nuclear power, we regulate biomedicine and so on. And obviously, we should regulate a machine that can facilitate all kinds of very risky and dangerous purposes. And then that applies also to the democratic space, that you want the pluralism, you want the guardrails of transparency, you want reporting from big platforms. How are they dealing with this? So I would like to not only Anthropic to tell us how they think about pluralism, but all the others too. If Elon Musk says, oh, ours will be much more better, okay, show me the beef, not just big talk, 140 character tweets on that, but show me technical documentation of what is political pluralism for you, how you define it, how do you think you can ensure that. So this is, I think, where our discussion should go, and where I think all democracies in the world have a legitimate interest to ask the question to these big platforms, because it applies in Sri Lanka as it applies in India, Indonesia, or Senegal.
Right, Michael. What you said about asking questions, and often the ones asking questions are organizations like DRI, as well as media. But given that when AI chatbots become the primary source of information for many, and the especially in contexts where their trust in media has ebbed, has gone down. What does it mean for faith in press and media and watchdog bodies from the citizens themselves if AI chatbots become the main source of information? Because then who asks the questions? Do they have credibility? Do they have legitimacy? Do they have the power to ask these big companies these big and important questions?
Yeah, that's also an interesting question. Of course, there's an incredible power asymmetry, especially because these big firms are now absolutely massively financed. There's a massive bet that this is a next level of industrialization. So they're swimming in money. Of course, they have massive expenses too. But if you think of financial, political, economic power compared to the watchdogs, it's not even David and Goliath. It's like David's small brother against Goliath's big brother. So it's extremely asymmetric. And I would say even for many governments, it's quite asymmetric. What is the real power that the government of Sri Lanka has over OpenAI? It's close to zero, I would say. And that's a big problem, because as democracies, we want that the power primarily emanates from people and citizens, and doesn't come from big companies. So it's a very big asymmetry. I think in the group you mentioned, we should not forget academic researchers also that bring a lot of interesting findings. I see our role as watchdogs and NGOs, especially as a conduit to the public, so that we have a public understanding and a public discussion on these challenges that is informed but not so complex to exclude many people. So I think you have to simplify to be more inclusive, and that's where we see our role, that it's technically accurate and we work with academic researchers, but that we also can talk about these things in a way that a democratic public can actually form opinions on it and what to do about it. And I think that's, yeah, if you think of the democratic public, in many countries, the democratic public uses a lot of chatbots. So how do we reach a public to think about that complete change of our public sphere?
And that brings me to my last question, because I think the most important thing is that it's just not about, it's not just technology or law, but society. AI has become so important, much more than social media, as one can see, because it is so personalized. As you said, that you should start anthropomorphizing AI, because what people miss in society, people may find it in AI, and it is so important for companies to state that this is a machine. But then it's also for the society to show a mirror to itself and see why people are going to AI. And I think that's the bigger fight, right, for democracy. So it comes to my last question, is that as conduits, as you said, organizations like yours who are at the front lines uh, of this this big challenge where AI can play a game-changing role in the kind of information people consume and the worldviews that they carry with them and the choices that they make. In all of this, what can be piloted as by the civic actors, especially like yourselves? What can be discussed? What can be piloted to preview, to ensure that there is more of politically plural information, accurate information, but plural information available through these chatbots, as well as these chatbots are also accountable, since it seems to be that the accountability factor is missing. Like, one can always write a letter to the editor and criticize them for a mistake, and they can come out with a corrigendum, but an AI does not come out with a corrigendum. They might say, okay, I'm sorry, I will redo it again. But
Mhm.
how do you do it now when it's become so critical and it is so so that these questions about how we are imperceptibly adopting the language, vocabulary, and worldview through our interactions with AI is not distorted, but goes through the right path. And here I specifically want to know the kind of work that civil society organizations, academic researchers, lawyers can do together.
Yeah. I will start with the more narrow technical, and then I will go to the broader. And on the more technical side, legal side, what is really interesting is that the main defense of social media companies, ever since they started, was we are just a conduit. We are not writing any text here. This is all about you people writing things. We are just connecting and passing on. That picture was always a little bit propagandistic, of course, because through algorithms they decide what to pass on. So yeah, they can say, oh, none of these pixels have been created by us, but they are putting the pixels together into some kind of impression of the world for the users. So for me, it was always a bit spurious to say that we are just a conduit. No, because they are forming the flows of information. Nevertheless, they could say we have written none of these posts ourselves. So yeah, we can try to weed out illegal content, etc. But beyond that, don't hold us accountable. And now these companies or other companies are in charge. They are really responsible. I have to say, as a lawyer, I would find that a bit dizzying if I worked in these firms, that every single output that my machine prepares around the world, I am accountable for it. And yeah, I didn't write it myself, but my machine wrote it. And we can see that there are many mistakes, that they may help terrorists, etc., etc. So in that sense, for lawyers, it becomes a bit easier because we don't have roundabout discussions about responsibility. What is coming out of ChatGPT? OpenAI is accountable for it everywhere. So in which ways and in how, that's a complex question, but the fundamental responsibility is very clear. So that's my more technical answer on this new world in which we are living with chatbots. What could be our role then as researchers, academics, NGOs? First, of course, is to create evidence, which is not easy because we also know that chatbots give very different answers to different people in different contexts, depending on your asking history and so forth. But so we can create evidence of how they work, what comes out, do they not manage risk well? So we can create a lot of evidence, which ideally becomes actionable, be it for legal cases, be it for complaints to the companies, be it for holding them at least publicly to account by publishing and so forth. But also, in a maybe more constructive way to get into conversations and find out or try to discuss with them what could be solutions to these kind of problems. So the typical functions of civil society: holding to account, blaming and shaming, constructive engagement, depends a bit on where you situate yourself as an organization. Beyond that, as societies, I think first we have this incredible catch-up. We're just jumping in this new technology, adopting it, and thinking it's normal. If we had told ourselves in 2022 the way we live today in 2026, most of us would have said, that's a bit science fiction. And now we think it's completely normal. So first we have to catch up. What are we doing here? How is this working? What is it doing to all of us? What is it doing to society? And that's a much bigger conversation, I think, with all of society. And we shouldn't think of governments here. We should think of religious players, of trade unions, of political parties. I mean, anybody who brings people together and tries to make sense of this world should really talk about that. And at that level, ever since we have mobile phones and we walk around the world and we see everybody staring at the phone, for me, there's always this fundamental question: is this serving us, or have we become enslaved by these machines? And I'm really not sure. We think it's so great for us, but we addicted and can't stop looking there. And yeah, I think this hybrid world of human being and machine is now fully in the making. And I don't have a good answer, but I think many questions should be asked about where are we as human beings in all this.
Thank you so much, because I think you have gave multiple insights which come into a major answer about our relationship with technology. Like, it's very easy to offload the blame to states and to corporations. They are doing a quite a lot of harm, also good, but we try. But I think what the points you raised are so important, because often it is about our own cognitive offloading onto the chat GPTs, because it's so, or to any GPTs, because it's so convenient for us. And in this, for the sake of convenience, we are willing to give away our autonomy and consent. And what you said about mobile phones speaks loudly and clearly to our dependence, which is by choice. And it all boils down to choice, right? That it is how we choose our future. How do we choose the information, and how do we choose to be convinced by the information source that we read? I really enjoyed this conversation, especially your insights, and I keep on focus. I follow the work of Democracy Reporting International, and
Thank you.
your work, and especially your writings, uh, because it's always important for us to know what people on the ground see, and where is to draw the line between the noise, as you said, cut out the white noise as well as the red noise, and see the letter as it is, for what it is. And I really appreciate the clarity. So thank you so much for being part of this podcast.
Thank you,
And
Sangeeta. It was a
thank
pleasure
you.
to be here.
It was our pleasure, and we will keep on. We would like to carry forward this conversation. And thank you, audience, for joining us. A thought to close on, that comes from the conversation that we just had with Michelle Meyer-Resende. I go back to the fish aphorism. So I started by saying that the fish is the last to discover water. But there is a second part of that line that is rarely quoted. And that is, once the fish discovers water, it rarely unnotices it. And therefore, it is very important that we know the medium that we are dealing with. We know the information source that we are dealing it. Because once we know that, we will be able to be truly informed and truly empowered. So for more such conversations, please visit the German Institute for Global and Area Studies website, giga-hamburg.de. And please do follow the work of Democracy Reporting International as they continue to hold powers to account through their landmark work on election and information monitoring and tracking. Until then, stay curious, especially about the water. Bye-bye.